Jesus wants a really close walk with you, a walk so close that you talk with each other. He walks and talks with you, and you have a close association. So he had these apostles, 4 of them, who he was telling what was going to happen. He was warning them. And if you walk really close to Jesus, you'll hear him and tell you things to come. May not be as many and as detailed as this was, but, he'll tell you things to come. This next verse is a controversial. It's a big word for you younger ones. It's like some people think it's this way, some people think it's this way. Christians have different opinions on it. I have my own opinion. Could be wrong. I've been wrong before. And this is about the generation. Here, by the way, are different generations. And we'll get to them in a second. Here's the verse. This is verse 30. Mark 13:30. Are you ready? Here we go. And I tell you the truth. He always tells the truth. But when he says, verily or truly, I say to you, or I solemnly tell you, I solemnly, it's hard to say solemnly tell you. It's basically saying he's really serious about this. What I'm about to say is very important. More important than other stuff, or he really wants to emphasize a fact. He wants to say this is no light matter. Don't take this lightly. I tell you the truth, this generation, we'll get to that in a second, will certainly not, it will not pass away. You're not going to die. There's going to be people in this generation that will not die until all these things have happened. What things? We'll get that in a second. Generation. Here, excuse me, we have, different generations of a family. Let's start with the older ones here. Here's our grandpa. Here's our grandpa. They're actually really, really close friends. Both of them are elders and very wise, and they were Christians. I love these guys. I actually have names on them, but we're not going to go into it. All right, so these guys right here are examples, models of who you should listen to your elders, just for sure. But here's a generation, like an older generation. And then you have a bit younger. These are their sons. Here's that guy's son and this guy's son right here. Yeah. They're really close friends, by the way. They're real buddies. They like doing things together. They pray together also, and they talk about parenting and all that. So this is a younger generation. Can you see them there? Yeah. All right. So that's really cool. Then we have another generation. Uh-oh, sorry, Dad. Let's put him back up here so hopefully he'll stand. There you go. Stand on his own 2 feet. All right, here we go. And then we have a younger generation here. This happens to be the son of this guy and this family. And this happens to be the daughter of this family. They're real close friends too. Really cool. They like each other as friends, and they go to the same school and things like that. Living in the same neighborhood, really close neighbors. And then we've got another generation here. These are the little tots here. All right, so I watch me drop them. Oh, I hope they don't drop. Oops, almost dropped him. It's hard to hold on to him. Excuse me. Whoa. Excuse me. This little guy and this little guy. Here we go. And they like playing together. And sometimes they hang out together because the families come together quite often. And it's a community of believers here. But this is definitely the younger generation. Which generation do you fit into? Of course, there's also younger ones. They actually have more in their family, and I just put out some. So we have different ages and generations. I think that's what he's talking about there. Some people suggest this is different races, or the generation has to do with the Jewish people, or something like that. I don't think so. I think he's talking about the contemporary generation that Jesus was living in, first century. This is 30 AD that he's saying this. He said, this generation, you guys, some of you are going to actually be here when all these things, he just named a bunch of things from like way back, verse 2 all the way up to here. And this is verse 30. That's a lot of verses there. And so he said, again, let me read it. I'll tell you the truth. He said, surely that this generation will not pass away. They're not going to all die. Maybe the older generation died. These guys, some of them may have died, but not the younger. This generation will not die until all these things happen. Okay? So that's what Jesus said. And he really meant it when he said, I tell you the truth. By the way, I tell you the truth, that truly I say to you, is mentioned. Mark says that same phrase 13 times in his book. And the thing about this generation thing, that's 41 times in the New Testament it's used, that word right there. And so he has this generation, he says, and basically, like I said earlier, he's speaking about, he's right now talking this at 30 AD. This is when I believe he died, which is a couple days from now in our stories. And then he said this generation from here to here, 70 AD is when it all got fulfilled. Some of it was fulfilled along this, along here, but especially this one, the destruction of Jerusalem, the abomination of desolation and all that. And that was, if you count it, 40 years from 30 to 70 is 40 years. Guess what? The biblical number in a generation, how much do they usually count a generation, like a father or something? 40 years. Every 40 years is a generation. So if it's 80 years, that's 2 generations. Typically, not always, that is what it's used for. So it's interesting when Jesus said, this generation, these things shall happen. It was 40 years later. And they said all these things. Do you remember we've mentioned this quite a bit in our teachings? Well, a few times actually. But I mentioned it recently quite a bit. In the last verse, for example, it's mentioned there. Things are going to happen here. And so Jesus said all these things, all the things he's been mentioning, over these last verses. And here is the list, kind of basically. He mentioned, if you remember, false Christs, false messiahs, false teachers, prophets, Christ. He also mentioned wars and rumors of wars. He also mentioned earthquakes are going to happen and famines. All this happened, by the way, in this time period. All these things I'm mentioning right here, there were several of these that happened here. Wars and rumors of war, earthquakes happen, famines. Even it's mentioned even in the Bible. Persecutions are going to deliver you up and they're going to kill you and persecute you and all. The abomination of desolation, we discussed that in the temple of what happened. Then he mentions again false Christ. So all these things right there was going to happen in this generation. Some people think that verse is for future times. I just don't think it is. He's talking to them. I tell you the truth, this generation. And by the way, that phrase, this generation, was used 4 times already in Mark. No, 3 other times in chapter 8 and all. And so he's mentioned that. Each one of the times, anytime he said this generation, that was absolutely during that time period with those people, with the apostles, the disciples, and the contemporary people right then. Those other verses every time says that. So when Mark mentions this generation, when Jesus said that, I think he's really talking about that time period and not something way in the future. Do you understand? So I really think it's pretty clear that this whole chapter right here, he's saying all these things shall come to pass at that time. Now, it's possible, if you want to go a little deeper, that when he talks about at that time when men will see the Son of Man coming in clouds and all that, it could be his invisible coming. I mean, it really could be in clouds because that's used, as I've said before, in the Old Testament terminology. Clouds with great power and glory. That happened in the Old Testament where Yahweh comes and he judges a nation. So it could be he's using that pictorial language from the Old Testament. And he will send his angels and gather his elect. I mentioned what that could be. I mean, this passage right here, those little verses right here, could literally be for the future. I mean, it's possible. Or it could have been in the past. And also, I will say this, that the earthquakes and the false Christs and all that, just because it happened then doesn't mean it can't be repeated until now. And all those things have continued to happen, except for the abomination of desolation. I mean, we've still had earthquakes, lots of them. We've had increase in earthquakes. We've had famines where people are starving. It's so super sad, and there's not enough rain in certain countries and all that. So just because it happened here, it doesn't mean that it can't be duplicated throughout time. And this could be a foreshadowing, like this happened at this time, but it was also going to repeat. History repeats itself. And so this whole passage could include the idea of the second coming, that generation. But I really think the best interpretation of that was in the past, in that 30 to 70 AD period. Okay, there's more I wanted to say. If I think about this generation shall not pass away until all these things have happened. Oh, I can't remember what I was just about to say. It's good, but it's the whole bit here is right in that time period. And he's kind of warning them. And by the way, that generation is the ones at that time that was rejecting Jesus, at least some of the leaders, the Jewish leaders and all. They were kind of rejecting him. And so why not should all these things should come to pass upon them? He's pronouncing judgment on those people in that generation. So, he's going to come and kind of tear it up. And that's what happened. The armies of Rome surrounded the city of Jerusalem, and they destroyed Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple. Oh, in answer to the question, that's what I was going to say, I believe, that in answer to the question in verse 2, when the disciples were, or verse 1, when they said, look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent things. In verse 2, he says, you all see all these great buildings, and not one stone will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. And now he's literally saying, I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things, like the destruction of the temple, shall come to pass. He's answering their question that they ask. And so it's really for that time period and not ours. All right, well, thank you very much. God bless. Hope you understand it. I hope you're gathering information here. And then I pray that you would follow the Lord, and may your generation be one that God is very pleased with. Amen. God bless you.